Hello, I'm John Kogan, the CEO of Proformative, the leading platform for professional development across the office of the CFO. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's event entitled How to Build a Great Cloud and SaaS Business Case Analysis for Technology Investment. I'd like to thank our sponsor, GoTransverse, whose commitment to thought leadership in this realm helps us make today's educational webinar possible and delivered at no cost to the participants. Shifting from a CapEx to an OpEx model is one of the many potential benefits when considering cloud-based technology solutions. Today, our expert speakers will help shed light on the economics of the cloud and provide insights into quantifying the financial benefits of smart technology investments. We have a number of learning objectives for today's event. Number one, understanding benefits of creating a business case analysis, or BCA, for technology investments. Number two, learning to build a business case that quantifies financial benefits. Number three, minimize subjectivity by ensuring assumptions and calculations are transparent and conservative. And number four, define key components of cloud economics. So that's a lot of ground to cover, and we'll get started on that in just a few moments here. We do have a few notes on today's event, so let's go and get these out of the way quickly. Slides are available for download. They're actually available right now. If you refer to your GoToWebinar control panel, and you might have to hit the blue flower icon in your applications area in order to bring that up. But if you look at that towards the bottom, you'll see a section entitled Handouts. You might need to hit the plus to expand that, and right there you will see the slides for download. We will also send you an email within the next 24 hours, and that will have links to downloads of the presentation and to a recording of the webinar, which we are making right now. If you're interested in CPE credit, please answer all 3 polling questions during the event and remain for the duration of the hour. CPE credits are awarded within 24 hours. You can find those under the My CPE area of your Proformative profile. Please make sure you are logged in when you go looking for that, or you will not find it. If you have any questions at all on CPE, simply email us cpe@proformative.com. We would like to make this an interactive event. We have set some time aside at the tail end for Q&A. And we love answering questions, and we've got a couple of genuine subject matter experts here to help us all learn today. It's a great opportunity to get your questions answered right on the spot. So we encourage you to ask questions, and you will find the place to ask questions once again on your GoToWebinar control panel. Simply entitled Questions. There's a little box there. You can type it in at any time. No one but me will see who's asking the question, so you will remain safely anonymous from everyone else who's on the call. So please don't hesitate. Get your questions in. Finally, at the tail end of today's event, we'll present you with a short survey, and we greatly appreciate your giving us your feedback. Helps us do better every time out. Also, if you find that you're interested in connecting with either of our speakers or our sponsor, GoTransverse, then you can request to do so at the click of a mouse on that post-event survey. So that's a great way to quickly and easily make those connections. Next up, we do want to officially welcome everyone to Proformative. We are the leading professional development resource for every member of the Office of the CFO. And thanks so much for joining us, whether this is your first Proformative web event or your 50th. It's great to have you on board. We do over 200 of these events every year, which is amazing to think about, but we're here at 11 a.m. Pacific every day. We also have our great online community, which gets over 2 million unique visitors every year, all within the Office of the CFO. We also have Proformative Academy, which is over 250 on-demand courses, which are a wonderful way to learn on demand, and this is something that's accessed via subscription for $99 a year. So we welcome you. Thanks so much for joining us. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speakers, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome these 2 gentlemen. First up, I'll introduce Drew Wright, co-founder, principal consultant at Technology Finance Partners. Drew has worked with numerous clients, including Alcatel Genesis, Polycom, Informatica, Autodesk, and AT&T, to drive intelligent enterprise technology investment. Drew has been at the forefront of business transformation to the cloud and has spoken at a number of software conferences on the subjects of ROI, green IT, SaaS pricing strategies, and customer analytics. Joining Drew and kicking us off today is Mike Murphy, who's a CPA and the Chief Business Officer at GoTransverse. Mike is a finance executive with 20 years of experience managing the back office to drive global revenue. Having been in the CFO seat, he has experience managing global accounting, revenue operations, and finance organizations in the fast-paced technology industry, leading companies through the transition to a subscription economy. Well, Mike, it's great having you here with us, and thanks so much for kicking off our session today.
Great, and thank you, John. It's definitely been a pleasure even putting this together. I've been able to work with Drew Wright again. He and I have been working together for many years, so it's great to be able to work with him on this presentation. So before I get into it, we start off with the initial slide here. We start talking about what is the benefit of a business case and why put one together. And as everybody in the finance realm knows, we're very busy. We have budgets, we have quarter closes, month closes, year-end audits, tax, etc. And this looks like just another bit of busy work that we're putting on top of it, but it's a little bit more important than that. And as we go through this presentation, hopefully you get a sense from that that is not something that is being added on to a workload to basically create busy work. It's really trying to help align your corporate strategy with your various investments and your and things you're trying to execute upon. So anybody who's worked with me in the past has heard me use this or utter this phrase, budgets are meant to be broken. And what do I mean by that is we're sitting around, this is that time of year that all of us from a financial perspective are putting together our budgets, our plans for next year. It's that time of season where you're closing up your current year and getting ready to plan for next year. And the one thing I always look at is the best laid plans that you start putting together don't always work out. What gets in the way of that is the reality of business. Business changes lots of different ways. I'm sure if you look back to your budget preparations the year before, there were probably quite a few things that changed between when you were putting together the budget and what actually happened. And so when taking that into consideration, a couple things we look at are some of the reasons why you would want to basically start thinking about putting together a business case analysis with the understanding that budgets aren't the end-all, be-all structure in which you want to do. And a couple things that we looked at from a stats perspective is, 1 in 6 IT projects have major cost overruns. That was a review by Harvard Business Review. Then overall, the U.S. economy loses a significant amount based upon IT projects not working out as planned. And then fewer than a third of all IT projects were successfully completed on time. So you start looking at these stats and you have to ask yourself, from an executive perspective who's trying to make a decision on what project to stake his or her career on, looking at these numbers, it looks like it's fraught full of risk. So how do you go about in managing some of those risks and ensuring that you're making the right decisions? And so that's really where the business case analysis part comes in. And we start off with, when you start looking at a BCA, or business case analysis, what is really going to help you as a finance leader or an executive is putting together and looking at the various projects that your company is trying to engage upon, and helps you come up with a prioritization. So you can look at, from a company perspective, I'm sure all of you have come across this before, there's a litany of projects that your organization may want to go down. And how do you go through and actually prioritize which ones make the best sense? The other piece, and I think one thing that oftentimes gets overlooked, is the amount of resources that these IT projects really need to be utilized to make this project successful. Oftentimes, it sounds like a great idea. Somebody will say, hey, I like that project, let's go ahead and greenlight it, move forward with it. But they only sign 2 or 3 people to it, and the reality is it's a cross-organizational assignment, and it probably required 20 resources to make it successful. So what ends up happening is that project never really gets anywhere. It sits in a silo, and it doesn't move where it needs to move. Then the next piece is you start looking at what should be incorporated into a business case analysis, and this is important. You want to make sure that you have accurate and transparent numbers or activities or benefits built into the BCA. Because if you don't, if it's not accurate, you could be distorting reality and causing your executives, your company to invest in something that doesn't make sense. And if it's not transparent, and by transparent being something that people, that the business users can understand and articulate and tie back into, it also causes a problem as far as how you would actually view that. All right, so sorry, it took me a little bit to get the next slide. So analytical expectations. So what do we mean by analytical? Well, bottom line is if you look at a lot of different projects and how they get green lighted, the biggest risk that you would have is that you make a gut reaction, meaning that, hey, that sounds great, let's go ahead and go do it. The analytical piece means that you apply financial discipline in putting together what it will really take to make that project successful, and also understand what those outcomes and benefits of that project are going to look like. Key things when you're creating your analytical approach is ensuring that you tie your proof back to your support. And what do I mean by that? So if you look at one of the things I found with very successful business cases is that you're able to align your outcomes or your benefits directly into what your corporate or specific objectives are, so that you are at the end of the day, you don't want to go through and launch a project if it's not aligning with the vision or the goals of your company. The other piece is, as financial executives are getting more and more involved in the various strategies of the business, they are looking for numbers to support the costs that they're about to incur. So they really want to dive into the numbers and feel confident that the company has put together a plan, it makes rational sense, and it is going to be tying to your overall objectives. And then the next piece is you want to minimize the bias risk. So bias risk is you have a list of priorities that an organization has, and somebody has their sweetheart project or the project that they really want to move forward with. And at the end of the day, it's probably not tying directly into the outcomes you really want to have from a business perspective. So in today's world where you're having more and more of within a company, you're having a variety or a committee actually looking at a project and making an ultimate determination. There could be 3 or 4 people looking at these different outcomes and trying to prioritize. Having a good business case analysis will help you minimize that bias risk and essentially help that committee come up with the right prioritization as far as they want to move forward towards. And John, with that, I think we've come to our first polling question.
We absolutely have. So this is the first of 3 polling questions. I'm launching it right now. The question is, does your organization have a formal corporate-approved template or process for business case analyses? And this will be really interesting to see. The results of, I will leave this out for 30 seconds or so to give everyone plenty of time. And we love to hear from everyone, whether you're here for CPE or not. It provides insight to the speakers so that they can better understand the audience and tailor their presentation. So please, everyone, just take a few seconds to weigh in here, and that's greatly appreciated. Your results will be anonymized, by the way, so no one will see what your vote is. I'm going to go ahead and close this down now. Let's share out the results and see what we've got here. So Drew, we'll welcome Drew into the mix here, co-founder of Technology Finance Partners. Drew, what do you think about the results of this first poll?
So this is very interesting, and I will say that I'm maybe just a smidge surprised, but not completely. we work with a number of clients and then their prospects and customers in providing this business case analysis support on specific technology investments that are being considered. And the majority of the time, just like you see in your poll here, the customer that's being sold into, or the prospect that's being sold into, does not have a formal corporate approved template or process for doing business case analysis. So I guess I shouldn't be surprised, because the results pan out with my my real life experience. I just was hoping that, considering the group that we're talking to, being part of the Office of the CFO, that maybe the numbers would be a little bit higher on either having some sort of a template or some sort of specific template. But you know what? This sounds like job security for me, so I'm okay with it.
Yeah, and you know what? We also all wish we had more specific templates available. You just don't always have time to get that going in the Office of the CFO. So yeah, this is actually not horribly surprising. All right, Drew, please take on over here.
Okay, great. So I'm going to talk a couple times in this presentation. First, we're just going to go through some basics regarding quantifying financial benefits of proposed technology investments. So typically, what we consider to be a comprehensive business case analysis is going to include a number of elements, and I'm going to go through the basic elements right now. The first is that you're going to forecast the benefits. And we've, again, done hundreds, actually probably thousands of these analyses over the years as a company, and I myself. And the benefits that we're typically looking at are some sort of labor productivity gain through some sort of technology automation, other costs that can be reduced, whether they're business costs or maybe it's replacing a legacy system, but there's some additional costs beyond labor productivity that we're looking at. And then we also look at what the technology is doing from a business perspective, and are there any revenue gains, and of course the associated margin, not just the revenue, because the revenue would be overstating it. Are there some margin gains essentially that are revenue based that we can look at and forecast over time. On the cost side of the equation, we're looking at the upfront costs for the technology investment and then the recurring costs. And so in the traditional model, meaning something that's being run on premises, there's going to be some sort of capital investment, and that would be your upfront costs and some implementation costs, and then there's going to be recurring costs over time. We'll talk more about the difference with the cloud, but in the cloud, you're going to be talking about more of a recurring cost, because that's typically a subscription-based model. We're then going to map those benefits and those costs and see what that does from an annual net benefit perspective. And we're also going to want to be very careful and consider what the ramp up is to the receipt of those benefits. Having worked in this space for many years and consulted with a lot of vendors, we do get the shake your head experience when we work with a new client and they say, well, we have an ROI calculator and this is what it looks like. And the first thing we notice is that they haven't factored in the time to install, deploy, and develop user adoption for the given technology. And they're suggesting that the benefits miraculously occur on day one. And then we're going to calculate key financial metrics. So let me jump right into some of those key financial metrics. The first one is probably the sort of the Kleenex of tissues for financial metrics. It's a return on investment, or ROI. This is the term that you will most commonly hear. And we'll go into, there's not a whole lot of more detail to go into this. In fact, it's really just the total net benefits minus the total cost divided by the total costs. And what you will want to note here is that ROI does not typically take into account time value of money. And so you pick a time horizon, typically 5 years, but it could be 3 or 4 years for some clients that are in certain, well, I've worked with, say, General Motors or Boeing, and they might take a 10-year view, but typically 5 years is good for these technology investments. And so it's just taking that static benefits minus costs over costs and for that given time period. The next one is net present value, and this one does take into account the time value of money, and so it's looking at that same time horizon, but it's putting the net benefits into today's dollars so that you can understand, better the impact, from a time value of money perspective. By definition, if the NPV is less than 0, then that's not a good investment to make. Well, I guess we could see both of them now. then there's the payback period. This one, over the past few years, really, especially after the bubble burst, and then after the 2008-ish, meltdown in the housing markets. Anytime there's a big market downturn, payback becomes very significant. And in this, you're looking at when do the benefits outweigh the costs from a cumulative perspective. And so that one becomes really important when people are looking to get their money back as fast as possible. And then there's another one that we actually don't use as much, but I do want to mention, that's the internal rate of return. The reason why this is important is that companies typically set up a hurdle rate, which is essentially the investment value that they're looking to get from an investment. Typically for corporations, that's somewhere in the 9 to 11% range these days with the low cost of money, but it's something that factors in risk. You probably have heard of it as weighted average cost of capital or risk-adjusted weighted average cost of capital. And so the internal rate of return is taking the NPV formula and setting that equal to 0, and then calculating for the discount rate and comparing that to the corporation's hurdle rate. So again, there's not a whole lot to be said about ROI. We'll look at that a little bit later, but again, it's benefits minus costs over costs. Payback becomes interesting. There's this is a chart that we use in our business case analysis template, and so there's a lot of things going on here. The light blue line is showing when the technology is put into production. So there's a lag period between when it's bought, when the investment is made, and when it's put into production. And then there's the time to the dark blue line, which is the payback. And what you're seeing in green is a range of benefits. I think Mike will talk about that a little bit more later, but we like to do scenario analyses where you're looking at sort of a low, medium, high, or a conservative, likely, optimistic. And so in the middle there, you see that likely line. So what do we most think the benefits will be? And so when that likely line crosses the red line, which is the costs, then that's when you achieve your payback. And again, the red line here you might recognize as being an annual subscription model, as you can see these steps at the beginning of each year. So I don't know how many of you went to business school, but this is a finance cruise, so you may have seen these calculations before. I got to experience the joy of this when I got my MBA, and so this is the formal NPV formula that hopefully most of us have forgotten because we know how to use Excel. But at any rate, this is taking a look at the cash flows, and you've got your initial cash outlay, that's your investment, and then you're taking a look at the incremental cash that is either gained or lost through time and discounting it at the hurdle rate that we mentioned earlier over a given period of time. And that's what this is showing, that summation. And so let's see, got a little bit of latency here. And not seeing any change in the slides here. Let me click on this again, see if that helps. Oh, man, we're jamming ahead here. All right, well, anyhow, let's proceed. So that same formula is used to calculate IRR, which is where you take NPV and set it to equal 0 and you solve for R. Again, we typically use Excel for these, and Excel has built all these formulas into it, as most of you probably know. So then this is the high-level summary of a business case analysis. There will be, if you look at the bottom box for a moment, you can see the benefits, and this is going to be the summation of multiple benefits that have been calculated discretely and summed into the given years from the forecast of the benefits. As mentioned earlier, you'll see that year 1 is lower because it takes time for adoption, and then you can see that there's growth built into this model. That's why years 2, 3, 4, and 5 are increasing. You can then see the costs in this model. This was more of a subscription or a cloud model, so there is a little bit more up front, but then you've got this annual. Potentially there could be some increases in those numbers as well to map to the growth. And then you're taking the benefits minus the costs to come up with your net benefit line, and then you can look at the cumulative net benefit to see where you're going to get payback. And so when you look at the top box, you can see that 1.847 million in 5-year net benefit, but when you discount that at a hurdle rate of 10%, you get 1.3 million, and that's the net present value. If you take the net benefit of 1.8 million divided by the total cost of 1.1 million, that's where you get the 168% ROI. And then again, you can see that the line's going to cross somewhere in year 2, and when we did this analysis more rigorously, and you saw the payback chart earlier, then you're hitting payback around month 18. So what do you do with all of this? So we've sort of talked about these as if they're discrete snapshots, but really when you're looking at developing a business case, you're comparing that business case to a number of things. One, you might be comparing multiple business cases from multiple vendors for a given technology investment, and you're trying to understand how the differentiated features from the different vendors compare, and so are you going to get a different net present value and payback from one vendor versus another. Most often, if you're looking at a discrete business case, you're comparing that against status quo, or essentially doing nothing, and you can calculate the cost of doing nothing by looking at the benefits from the business case as a lost opportunity. And so you can make calculations that say, well, the longer we delay this, the longer it's going to take to get to these benefits, and that's really the cost of doing nothing. But also from a budgeting perspective, at least on an annual basis, you could be taking a look at these investment opportunities and comparing them against other investment opportunities. There may be, every department may be coming at you and asking you for budget for their desired technology investment, and you only have so much budget. Now, if all the investments are going to drive value, you may choose to take on all of them. And in this case, you could say that these bubbles would represent all positive investments, and so you may make all of them. But it's important, and this is obviously a little bit simplistic, but if you're just looking at the numbers, then you will want to compare 3 basic metrics. One is, what's the 5-year net present value, and so you can see that on the x-axis, the 5-year net present value. You'll want to compare that to risk, going from low to high. So the higher risk, the lower the bubble will be, and the lower the risk, the higher the bubble will be. And then the size of the bubble is the cost, the 5-year cost. And so this just, again, from a pure numbers perspective, you still need to think about how things fit into corporate objectives. From a pure numbers perspective, this will allow you to make some prioritization assessments. And so when you look at this, you might say, well, the dark blue is probably the best from a numbers perspective. It drives almost the highest value at the lowest risk and at a low cost. And so that makes it very attractive. The red one could also be put in that same vein. Again, not a huge cost relative to the other investments, very low risk and reasonable value. And then it starts getting a little bit more murky as you look at maybe the green investment, and that's got middle risk and kind of middling cost and value that's reasonable, but again, something to look at. And then between the yellow and the blue, the light blue, these are much higher cost ones, lots of a risk associated, and maybe not as much value as you'd like. Again, though, all of these have positive NPVs, which signifies that they are worthwhile investments. And as you compare one investment to another, you need to make sure that the business cases have been done on at least some sort of an apples to apples comparison, that there aren't any crazy assumptions in one business case versus another. All right, John, that takes us to our next polling question.
Great, thank you, Drew. So I'm launching polling question number 2. And that should hit your screen in just a moment. Here we go. Which metrics does your organization use to quantify technology investment decisions? I love the last one there. Metrics, what metrics? Okay. We'll leave that out for 30 seconds as we did before. I'll remind folks you're going to ask questions at any time, and we'll do our best to get to those questions. We actually have some questions already. Thanks for those. But keep them coming, and we'll do our best to get to them when we get to the Q&A portion of today's event. And we'll leave that out just for a few more moments. Make sure everyone gets an opportunity to get their vote in. I'm going to go ahead and close that down now. And as we did last time, let's share out the result. And Drew, why don't we give you the first shot at giving your perspective on this. Whoops, and there it goes. Okay. Well, I can see we've got a winner here.
Yes, and with the utmost due respect to your audience, that's the wrong answer. So now and I understand that you're not saying that's your answer. You're saying that's your organization's answer. So if there's one thing that you can do out of this session today, is go back and educate your organizations that since there's no time value of money component to ROI, you really ought to be looking at the pairing of NPV and payback, since that takes into consideration time value of money. You could have an ROI on an investment where for the first 4 years you get zero value and it's completely back-end loaded with tons of risk, and you're going to say that's a better investment opportunity, and that just simply would be wrong. So if nothing else, and I'm going to pass it over to Mike to talk me down off the ledge, and get his thoughts as well.
Yeah, calm down, Drew. No, and in all honesty too. So when I look at these from how I would be looking at my investments, NPV and payback period are again the ones that I generally have gone through, and of course, Drew, that has a lot to do with you teaching me that over many years. So I appreciate it. So it's good to be right. So in the next section here, we're going to go back and touch upon something I hit a little bit earlier on when we first started opening, and that's about transparency and accuracy. And what do I mean by that, and why is that important for a business case to put through? And just making sure the slide is working here. Yep, there we go. All right, so what do I mean by transparent? So the best example I can give here is you can spend countless hours, cycles, everything else, putting together a business case based off of all sorts of metrics, and then it goes to the committee of 3 to 5 executives, and at the end of the day, they don't know what you're talking about. So by transparency, you need to be able to pull on metrics that your audience is going to fully understand and appreciate. And that could be everything from cost equations that you specifically call out. It could be internal metrics or KPIs that your organization uses, or it might be tied right into what your organization, what your corporate objectives are, or your individual objectives are. They could tie into those as well. But it's very important that you have these metrics that other folks understand. I know, being a finance person, I can't tell you how many times I've had conversations with executives where I'm throwing out metric acronyms or anything else, and I can look in their eyes and see that glazed over look. So being transparent, you really want to be able to articulate that, make sure they understand it, and if not, be able to explain it as something that people can look at and understand in a pretty quick manner. It also ties right into your accuracy of your numbers. So one case in point, years ago, I had somebody put together a business case analysis that was provided to our board of directors. They were an outside firm, an outside vendor trying to establish a business within our company. And the first thing that they did is they were taking, they had very transparent numbers. They tied right into key metrics. It was fully understood. The board of directors, their executive management team understood everything. But the number one fault was that their key assumptions and their accuracy of the numbers were called into question. And that became a major problem for them, especially as an outside vendor. They weren't able to articulate the value. It made it difficult for me as the project sponsor to be able to try to articulate that, because when push came to shove and people started digging into the various numbers that were supplied, the first thing that came across was they're not believable, and therefore overstating your benefits, and go away, go do the project the way I told you to do it in the beginning. So just rule of thumb, make sure that your numbers are transparent or accurate. And if you look at the example, this is a pretty good example of how you would go about breaking out numbers and being able to articulate them as well. So here you see you're showing, from a benefit perspective, you're showing the daily savings per employee, and talks about how that is calculated out, and it should be able to tie back into numbers that your CFO or somebody in finance or in your board could pull out their calculator and look at. Okay, well, hey, that makes sense. That ties back to what my expectation would be. Then the information flows, and it starts to show what the actual savings would look like based on the number of employees that you would have. And then as you become sophisticated with your models, you can actually show what the impact to your profitability is based off your blended tax rate. So a good example of how to put together metrics, cost, and accuracy to be able to flow that information down so that somebody can look at that and make a decision. So the other thing that I am a very large fan of is the use of scenarios, and I'll give you an example of this. So what you look at is you have low, medium, and high, and just recently I was involved with a client of ours that was interested in doing a IT project, and we worked with them a little bit on their business case, and we gave them some advice as far as putting together a low, medium, and high scenarios for their business. And what ended up happening with that is we turned that over to them. We gave them the methodology behind how to build this out. And because of the various assumptions, they were actually able to stress test their business case analysis. So what that did is it armed the business users to be able to go into their executive management team and handle all the hardball questions you're going to get from the CFO and the CEO. And in this case, they were asked a whole litany of questions. And when it came down to it, when the CFO eventually said, no, I want to take this model and I'm going to stress it myself. And the result was that not only was their project approved, but the entire project, including the pie in the sky final phases, were also approved at the same time, because they realized, hey, this is actually a very large benefit, and therefore it's something we should really pursue. So I'm a very big fan of doing the low, medium, and high, and or you can even call it the worst, medium, and best case scenarios, because it allows executives the ability to look at various ranges and articulate and understand if they change certain assumptions, how that will flow into the model. And also, from a manager perspective, as you're doing these projects, it gives you the levers that you have in order to ensure that the project's successful. And this is, again, from a presentation perspective, I think being in finance, we're all very comfortable with numbers and Excel and putting those things together. But when you start getting to the executive level, everybody likes to see the nice, pretty chart. So essentially what we did here is we took the various business case scenarios and put them into a nice presentation that show that at the end of the day, even in a worst case scenario, you're still doing very well in this with this scenario. And oftentimes, so you focus in, a lot of people's eyes are generally drawn to the blue line, but the CFOs and people that are pragmatic and worried about the risk will be spending most of their time looking at the worst case scenario. And of course, the CEO and the board of directors and everybody else will obviously be looking at the high case scenario. So something to keep in mind. And again, kind of highlighting that last point is we're all in the business of managing expectations. So if you start looking at these models and using these various scenarios to build out your assumptions as far as how you want to move the project forward, you start off with the hope and desire that your CEO and board will manage you personally to the low expectation. And then you can turn around and hold your employees accountable for the high. It's also meant to be a bit of a joke. But the idea is that most of the projects, if you time them out and work them properly, should be landing right around in that midpoint. So that's essentially the goal that you're going to have, is to be in the midpoint. And if you're very lucky and fortunate, hopefully you're able to get your board or your executives to buy into the low version. And with that, I think it's now time to turn it over to my friend Drew, who can walk you through the key components of cloud economics.
Thank you, Mike. So, having essentially worked for Mike from a contracting perspective, I will say that I have pulled a few muscles trying to, keep to that high expectation of his. All right, so let's talk about the cloud economics. So, thinking through the cloud, there are lots of opportunities. Very true statement. You take a lot of the work that you're doing on premises and you move it to the cloud, and there are opportunities, abundant opportunities. You can consider that there's that you're being rained on with cost savings opportunities. So there's labor savings potentially. You don't have to do as many upgrades. The environmentals like power and AC will be reduced. Hardware and software reduction, facilities, compliance, disaster recovery, lots and lots of opportunities. There's also some strategic opportunities to consider. So one is that when you move to a cloud solution, then the promise from the vendor is that you are always going to have the latest and greatest. So if any of you have been involved with buying a large ERP package, for example, you might be on version 3 and the vendor's pushing out version 6, and you're trying to make a decision whether you should upgrade to version 4, and that can be pretty frustrating because you always feel like you're a little bit behind. There's also a core competency focus where you can move non-core IT activities to the cloud and then take the resources that are freed up, your valued employees, and put them on projects where you can push out more of that know-how to your customers. There's an inherent shift of risk from the on-premises management of your technology to the cloud vendors. So they're taking on the risk of making sure that the lights are kept on. You also have a business agility opportunity. So with web services, you can push out a lot of the activity from IT to the business owners, and if they need to make certain changes, whether it's certain campaigns or whether there's tweaks in applications. We use Salesforce.com. We don't need to go to IT to make changes in that. We just make them ourselves. We want a new report as an example. So there's a lot of agility that comes from using cloud applications. And then also there's a future proofing. Again, the vendor's very focused on keeping you as a client, and so as innovation occurs, they are going to keep passing that on to you. I keep doing the double click here, so we'll see if this stays with us. But from a P&L perspective, when you use a cloud model, it's more of a usage-based model. And so that allows you to understand how costs are tied to demand more closely. So you really have better control of your OpEx. And then again, you just really are removing a lot of the CapEx discussion. So the variable nature of OpEx is the land that you're working in versus the larger decision-making process around CapEx. So let's look at some of the components of on-premises versus cloud. In that Rain Cloud example, we talked about some of these things, but if you are deploying a technology investment that's on-premises versus one that's on cloud, you need to think about the software and the hardware and the annual vendor support from an on-premises perspective, which of course all of that is included in the cloud or a SaaS offering. From that server perspective, you need to deal with refreshes. You need to have labor supporting the servers, or you might have vendor support for that. There's going to be some professional services involved with both, but typically cloud implementation is much more quick. There's still going to be integration involved, so depending on what you're integrating to, that could be higher on the cloud front, not higher than on premises, but just that can be a cost that you have to deal with. But typically cloud implementation is both quicker and less expensive than an on-premises implementation. You will not have to deal with the facilities costs that are associated with servers. Bandwidth is interesting. It depends on your environment. You've got WAN LAN issues on premises. You've got the internet for the cloud. So there can be some bandwidth considerations that might make it a little bit more expensive in the cloud. The support staff associated with the on-premises solution is much more significant. With the cloud, it has more to do with vendor management and can be business people instead of IT people that are providing support. There's just staff retention and training. We work with some clients that are still living in the land of, or actually are selling solutions to companies that are still living in the land of COBOL, and so you can imagine that you have a lot of concerns over retirement, and is there going to be anyone around that even knows COBOL if you've got that type of a situation, whereas in the cloud you're dealing with newer technology. So and then on the disaster recovery front and downtime front, there typically is a higher cost associated with on-premises. So a lot of it, when you look at the analysis of the two, is really going to come down to these various costs that are on premises, and so you can tally those up, and then you're comparing that to the cloud. So there's fewer buckets, and in the end, it's going to be how expensive are those buckets. I work with a ton of clients, and we do have some clients that sell really quality cloud solutions, but from a strict TCO perspective, their solution may come in a little bit higher over time than an on-premises solution. In this example, we're showing you that the cloud solution, it's probably a mature cloud vendor. They're able to come in lower than an on-premises solution, even over time. In some cases, the lines cross, and that's because the the cloud provider is, essentially asking you to compensate them for those business benefits that we outlined initially. And so, from that perspective, it's not always just a total cost of ownership comparison, but it's going to be back to that ROI comparison, that there's going to be additional business benefits of moving to the cloud. So again, thinking about some of those business benefits, it has to do with putting your core competency to the value that you're bringing to your customers, the accelerated time to innovation, as two key business benefits. And from a total cost of ownership perspective, when you buy for on-premises, then you need to buy to your peak needs so that you always are able to meet demand, whereas in the cloud you can do more of a capacity on demand or buy as you need it, and so that makes for a more scalable model. All right, if you have additional interest in calculating the ROI for technology investments, just let Proformative know, and we can send you a white paper that reviews a lot of the concepts that we've reviewed today regarding how to create a business case analysis, how to develop those financial metrics, and also best tips like Mike was talking about as far as scenario analysis and annotation and transparency. And with that, I'll pass it back to John.
Great, thank you very much. Yes, if you're interested in that white paper, let us know in the post-event survey, and you can let us know by requesting a connection to our speakers or our sponsor, GoTransfers. So we'd be more than happy to help you make that happen. All right, we've got a little time for Q&A, so let's go ahead and jump into it here. In fact, we've got some questions already on board. Let's start with Drew. How do you quantify faster innovation or driving value? This is, not hard dollar, savings or other things that we might traditionally think of in your ROI or your MPV calculation, but the ability to be more agile and enter new markets, et cetera. How do you actually state the case for that in a convincing fashion to really tough audiences like CFO, board, et cetera?
Great question. Thank you for that, and thank you for letting me present today. There's two components to that. So one is the deployment, especially if we're talking about a cloud solution, is the faster deployment to the receipt of benefits just by going to the cloud. And that's not exactly what your question was, but there is going to be generally a significantly reduced time period just to getting the technology up and running. The second piece really has to do with understanding the given environment, and what I've seen time and time again is that there's a huge backlog with IT, because IT is so often dealing with a lot of ad hoc issues and they have their own projects, and so a business person might be pulling their hair out because they cannot just get a new report that's going to allow them to make better business decisions. And so you get the qualitative understanding from the folks that are looking to make a technology investment on, what sort of lag time are they typically dealing with, and then you typically can put together a business case very conservatively, where you say that the value of certain decisions that they make is being hampered because they don't have the right business intelligence to make those decisions. And so if it's on the revenue front, you might show that that's having just a very nominal impact on their ability to drive new revenue. Maybe it's a fraction of a percent, but a small percent on a large number can make for a reasonable business case. Or if it has to do with other internal initiatives where you've got a group of people that are essentially spending more time because they don't have the report in this example that they need, and so then they have to go dig around and spend unproductive time gathering data and consolidating it and putting it together into their own self-created reports, then you can look at a labor productivity gain as well.
Okay, so Mike, I'm going to give you a similar question. There's always this debate over hard versus soft savings. Are you actually going to lay people off, or are you going to redeploy them? And benefit savings, no matter how you slice and dice it, it's about quantifying things that are difficult to quantify, like more productivity. What strategies have you found to be productive for getting that message across convincingly?
Yeah, so again, I think for me, a lot of it goes back to driving a variety of different scenarios, the low, medium, and high case scenarios. So first and foremost, I think we all recognize soft benefits are hard to measure, but I think you can make certain assumptions. So you can make assumptions about worker productivity gain just based upon, for example, moving from doing manual Excel processes to going and doing things online where all that information is there and is able to continue to be iterated on versus having to restart over in Excel. You can come up with some work type scenarios based off of that. And scenarios, using different productivity scenarios for that, of a 10% gain to a 50% gain, gives you a lot of flexibility of providing what that vision is going to be. And it makes it more difficult to, from an executive's perspective that really wants to dive into the numbers, they can look at that and they may say, well, maybe change that benefit from a 10% down to a 5%, and let's look at that. So from my perspective, using the scenarios is probably the best approach to dealing with those soft costs. The other piece, obviously, is you talked a little bit about headcount and people losing jobs, et cetera. I think in a lot of cases, companies that are in the path of growth, that are looking to innovate and add new technology to meet future demand and everything else, they realize that their employees are valuable resources. But they also realize that I can't grow if my employees are stuck doing very manual, tedious work. What I'd much rather do is take the people who have been doing that work and repurpose them and put them in positions where they're more successful to help me grow the top line. So when I look at these business case scenarios, and I can't say this 100% of the time, but in a lot of cases when I've been working with them, we have not been spending much time as far as looking at reducing headcount.
Gotcha. And I know we're at time, John, but one quick add to that is that companies don't hire employees to just cover their costs. They hire them to drive value to the shareholders. And so using employee cost in those calculations is the most conservative approach.
Yep, great. Thank you. Thanks to both of you. Great having all of that great insight brought to bear here today. So thanks very much, Mike and Drew.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Our pleasure. If you'd like an introduction to either of today's speakers or our sponsor, or if you'd like a copy of that white paper that was referenced earlier, please let us know in the post-event survey, which is coming up right after our polling question here in a moment. A hearty thank you to our friends at GoTransverse, whose commitment to thought leadership helps us make today's educational webinar possible and delivered at no cost to the participants. All right, we're going to go ahead and launch the third and final polling question now. Out it goes. And while folks are taking this polling question, I'm going to take the opportunity to thank everyone for joining us today. We certainly hope you enjoyed it. We hope to see you again soon at another Proformative event or online at Proformative.com. We're not going to have time to discuss the results here as we do with the other two, so I'll just say that the factors that are most important when considering tech investments, cost is number one, but very close in second and third of virtual dead heat are scalability and usability. So there you go. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close this down and close down the event. You will all be taken to the post-event survey now. Thanks again, everyone. Hope to see you again real soon. Cheers.